Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling something huge, truly monumental. We're doing a deep dive into Roberto Bolaño's massive, posthumously published novel, 2666.
It's an absolute universe of a book. You get sucked right in.
Yeah.
Our sources today cover this incredible range. You have 4 European academics who've built their entire lives around hunting for this ghost of an author.
An author nobody's ever seen.
Exactly. And then you have the reality of this brutal border city, Santa Teresa, which is a stand-in for Ciudad Juarez. And then woven through it all, these really deep philosophical crises about, what is knowledge? What is literature even for?
Okay, let's jump right in on that, because before we even get to the story, there's a piece of context from our sources that is just, it's critical. It changes how you see the entire project.
It really does. The way this enormous, sprawling book was published, It wasn't just an artistic choice. It was deeply, heartbreakingly personal.
And pragmatic.
Completely pragmatic. We have documentation from Bolaño's heirs that lays out his specific instructions right before he died. He knew he was running out of time, and he was thinking about his children's future.
So this wasn't supposed to be one giant book.
No. His plan was for 2666 to be published as 5 separate smaller books, one for each of the 5 parts of the novel.
Released one per year.
One per year, over 5 years. He specifically told his publisher to negotiate the pricing for each one separately. He was, in effect, turning his last great work of art into an annuity.
A way to provide for his family after he was gone.
It was an income stream. It's an incredible thought. This massive, chaotic, torrential novel isn't just an aesthetic object. It's an act of, familial love. An act of desperation, really, meant to sustain life against the finality of death.
That puts so much weight on it from the very beginning.
It gives it this ethical dimension you don't see in other books. It's literary theory that exists to, pay for groceries and school fees. It's this direct line between the search for meaning and the basics of living.
So that's our mission today. We're going to try and navigate this labyrinth. We want to pull out the surprising connections, the really profound questions that are hidden in these narratives that seem so different from each other.
We're basically guides into this intellectual maze where, the ivory tower of literary theory just collides violently with real-world horror.
Yeah.
We need to find the threads that tie it all together.
The critics, the killer, the poet, and the philosopher.
All of them.
Okay, let's start where the novel starts. In that very contained, almost suffocating world of European academia, the first part is called The Part About the Critics, and it introduces this quartet obsessed with the writer, Benno von Archimboldi.
Right, and this quartet is the heart of that obsession. They're the European literary establishment in miniature. You've got Pelletier and Espinosa, both department chairs, both experts in German literature.
But Espinosa has this little detail in his backstory that feels really important.
It's so telling, isn't it? He started out studying Spanish literature for 2 years because, and this is the key, he dreamed of being a writer.
The dream of creating something.
Yes, and he failed, or at least he gave up, and channeled that energy into analyzing the creations of others. It sets up this tension between creating and analyzing that defines his whole quest for Archimboldi, who is, the ultimate hidden creator.
And who are the other two?
Then there's Piero Marini. He's the oldest, incredibly insightful, but he's in a wheelchair after what the book just calls a strange and spectacular accident.
Vague.
Very vague. And finally, Liz Norton. She's the youngest of the group. She's working on her dissertation, and she very quickly becomes central to the dynamic between the 3 men.
And their shared obsession with this phantom author, Archimboldi, becomes like their entire identity.
It completely takes over. And what's interesting is how mundane their personal lives are.
Yeah.
The source notes that all 4 of them were single. They all lived alone, and they actually saw this as an encouraging sign.
Like a sign of their monastic devotion to the cause.
Exactly. The only real connection Norton has to the outside world is her brother, who works for an NGO and is always traveling. He's this moving figure against their very static academic lives.
And their whole intellectual community, this whole world, was actually born out of a fight, wasn't it?
Yes, which is so typical of academia. It all started with a disagreement over an article in issue 46 of some journal. And that was enough to split the entire field of Archimboldi studies into 2 warring camps. Our Quartet Pelletier, Espinosa, Marini, and Norton on one side, and these other academics on the other. It just shows you how narrow and self-referential their world was.
And within that group, Marini always feels like the anchor, the one who sees things a bit deeper. What was his insight when they met that weird Swabian cultural promoter?
This is a perfect example of his brilliance. So this promoter tells them this long, rambling story about seeing Archimboldi once. And while the others are trying to, decode it for clues,
Marini just cuts right through
he
it.
cuts through all of it. He doesn't see a clue. He sees a grotesque double of Archimboldi himself.
A double.
Not in terms of genius, but in terms of history and misery. Marini points out that both the promoter and Archimboldi were young men during the Nazi years. Both were WWII veterans. Both were citizens of a totally bankrupt nation after the war. They were both just poor bastards adrift at the same moment in history.
The promoter isn't a source of information about Archimboldi. He's a mirror. He's what Archimboldi could have become if he hadn't become a writer.
Precisely. Another forgotten man, adrift in the wreckage of post-war Germany. It's this incredible insight that genius and obscurity are sometimes separated by the thinnest of lines.
But this intellectual obsession, this high-minded quest, it gets completely derailed by something much more basic.
A romantic imbroglio, as the book calls it. The academic quest just hits a wall of human drama.
It all comes to a head in Salzburg, right?
Yeah, at a conference. Pelletier and Espinosa are up late at the hotel bar, and they finally have the conversation they've been avoiding. They realize, with this kind of dawning horror, that they've both been sleeping with Liz Norton.
And Espinosa can't even say it directly.
No, he's trying to be delicate, saying she was busy or distracted, anything to avoid admitting she felt distant. But Pelletier just asks the question that's hanging in the air. Were they really going to become enemies?
And then comes the moment of truth. The ultimate humiliation in London.
And this is so significant that Marini, the one who never travels, actually pays his own way to go to London to see Norton. He senses something is about to break.
But he's too late.
Way too late. Pelletier and Espinosa, the two rivals, show up at her apartment, and they're armed with their academic tokens of affection. Espinosa has flowers. Pelletier has a book about the sculptor Jacob Epstein.
They look up at her apartment window, and their whole world just falls apart.
They see her silhouette in the lighted window. But then, she's not alone. There's another silhouette next to her. A new man, Pritchard. And the source describes his presence as like a breath of foul air wafting into a commercial for sanitary pads.
A sudden blast of vulgar reality into their refined world.
And it's the way he moves.
Yeah.
Pritchard's silhouette performs this. This hula hooping motion. It's this aggressive sexual gesture. And the source says it expressed a mix of sarcasm and cruelty and assurance.
The assurance is key. He knows he's in charge.
Utterly. He's described as the strongest one in the apartment, the tallest, the most muscular, the hula hooper. He's pure physical power. And in that one moment, the flowers in the art book become completely pathetic.
Yeah.
Meaningless.
It's the body winning over the mind. Their intellectual status means nothing in the face of this raw physical confidence.
It's the collapse of the ivory tower. And their reaction to the humiliation is just, it's pure displacement. They leave, and a little later they get into an argument with a Pakistani taxi driver.
And all that repressed rage just explodes.
They turn it on someone they see as being lower on the social ladder. Espinosa and Pelletier drag the driver out of his car and start kicking him, yelling racist insults in English like, "Shove Islam up your ass."
Yeah.
It's this shocking moment where you see these high-minded academics engaging in brutal racist violence.
And when they finally go to Marini for advice, his analysis is just devastating.
It's the perfect critique of their entire worldview. Marini, even though he's feeling sick, just boils their failure down to one simple thing. He asks them a single question.
Which is,
Did either of you ever actually ask Norton if she loved this man, Pritchard? Or was she just attracted to him?
and they have to admit they didn't. They said it was out of delicacy, tact, and good taste.
And that's the indictment right there. Their good taste, their academic refinement made them incapable of asking a basic human question. They could spend decades analyzing the symbols in an invisible author's books, but they couldn't read the woman standing right in front of them.
Marini just says, well, that's where you should have begun.
Devastating. Their obsession with the invisible made them blind to the visible.
That failure, that blindness to the obvious truth, it's the perfect launch pad for the next part of their journey. They leave the failures of Europe behind and head straight into the violent reality of their obsession.
They go to Mexico, to Santa Teresa.
Following a tip from a promoter they call El Cerdo the Pig, they're still convinced they're about to find Archimboldi.
They really are. Their quest for high art leads them straight into a collision with high horror.
And they get help from a local professor, Amalficano, but their very European, very academic methods are useless.
Completely useless. Their investigation is so meticulous but so tragically wrong. They go to all the local newspaper offices and look through every paper for months, looking for any mention of Archimboldi. They check the death notices.
Okay.
Then they go through society politics, and in this wonderfully absurd detail, they even check the agriculture and livestock sections.
The livestock section.
Oh.
For a reclusive German literary genius.
It's the ultimate example of their naivete. They're applying the tools of literary criticism to a problem that requires, being a detective. The men give up pretty quickly. They send pessimistic reports back to Marini.
But Norton keeps going.
Norton's the one who actually calls the promoter, El Cerdo, after the men have thrown in the towel. She still has that drive, even if she has no idea what kind of city she's really in.
And we have to pivot here because the ghost they're hunting is real. We need to talk about Hans Reiter, the man who became Benno von Archimboldi.
Right, the man behind the pseudonym. And his origins are all about absence and war. He's Prussian, but he says all he ever knew of Prussia was its forests. His life was shaped by the German war machine.
He starts out working for a baron's nephew, right? Hugo Halder.
Yes, and Halder is this total opportunist. Reiter helps him steal things from his own family's country, house silver, candelabras, anything they can sell or pawn in Berlin. So Reiter is already complicit in this small-scale corruption before he even sees real combat.
But the moment that really breaks him, the trauma that creates the need for a new identity, happens in Romania.
This is the core trauma. His division is retreating, and they come across this horrific medieval scene in the middle of a modern war. The public crucifixion of a Romanian general named Antrescu, literally nailed to a giant wooden cross with blacksmith's nails. And Reiter's reaction isn't just horror. He sort of inspects it, almost scientifically. But his takeaway, the thought that becomes the engine for all his later writing, is pure nihilism.
What does he realize in that moment?
He realizes that even in the face of this absolute spectacular horror, human beings just keep on with their base compulsions. He says they just keep fucking themselves until their last breaths.
That even the ultimate terror can't distract people from their most basic animal drives.
Exactly. And a man who has seen that can't just go on being Hans Reiter.
Yeah.
The transformation has to begin. It continues in an American POW camp. He tells another soldier he's eating like a king on American meat.
And the soldier just bursts his bubble.
Immediately, he says, what you're eating isn't American meat, it's dog food. Another moment of total humiliation and deception.
The world is not what it seems. He's consuming garbage while thinking it's a feast.
And that pushes him further. The final piece falls into place after the war, in Cologne. He helps an old woman who turns out to be a fortune teller, and she gives him his mission.
Which is?
Change your name. You must never return to the scene of the crime. You must break the chain. She's telling him to completely sever himself from his past, psychologically and geographically. And that's when he becomes Benno von Archimboldi.
A name he probably took from the painter, Arcimboldo, who made portraits out of fruits and vegetables.
Right, suggesting an identity that's assembled from other parts. But of course his publisher misreads it and worries that Benno sounds too much like Benito Mussolini. The real world is always clumsily trying to label him.
And his relationship with Ingeborg, the Baroness, is another key part of this transformation.
She's dying of what she calls a nameless disease, and he's sort of caring for her before he has to leave. The final push comes from her helper, a man named Lube.
And Lube has his own dark story.
A horrifying one. Lube casually confesses to Reiter that he murdered his own wife by pushing her into a ravine, and then he told everyone she died of sorrow. He even buried her himself.
Just another piece of evidence for Reiter that the world is saturated with this casual, hidden violence.
It confirms his cynical realization from the crucifixion. So when he finally leaves Ingeborg and crosses the border, he's breaking away from a past that's been defined by both spectacular military horror and quiet domestic murder.
And this is the psychological wreckage that his books come out of. What are they like?
They're as fractured and bizarre as his history. It feels like a deliberate smokescreen. You have a book called The Blind Woman, about a blind woman who doesn't know she's blind and clairvoyant detectives who don't know they're clairvoyant.
A perfect metaphor for the critics hunting him.
It has to be. Then there's a play called The Black Sea, where the Black Sea literally has a conversation with the Atlantic Ocean.
It's almost playful, but then he gets dark again.
Very dark. A novel called Lethea was so sexual it was labeled pornography. And it was set in the Third Reich, mixing sexuality with the trauma of his past. Then there's The Father, about a son recalling his father's life as a psychopathic killer starting in 1938 and ending in 1948.
The exact time frame of the Nazi regime and its immediate aftermath.
His entire body of work is this massive, imperfect, sprawling attempt to process and contain the horror he witnessed.
And we know from the sources that this ghost, this author, ends up in Santa Teresa.
The trail leads directly there. A Syrian text traces him across Europe to Palermo, where he buys a ticket to Morocco, but actually goes to Santa Teresa. The ghost the academics are hunting is real, and he's in the city of the dead.
So now we have to go there. Into the heart of the novel, the reality of Santa Teresa, where the search for literary genius collides with an epidemic of murder.
And the city's geography itself is a map of its sickness. As the critics drive through it, you see the divisions. The poor west side with its unpaved streets and shacks, the decaying old center.
And then the nicer parts.
The middle and upper class east, where the university is, the playgrounds, the safe zones. And then the north, which is all abandoned factories, the maquiladoras, this industrial wasteland. It's a city of violent contrasts.
And the true horror of the city is introduced almost casually.
It's talking. The academics are in a bar talking about their literary theories, and some local guys just mention offhand a murder epidemic with over 200 victims. Their critics are just stunned.
They can't process it.
No, but it's confirmed at the official level. We get details from a police meeting.
And who's at this meeting?
You have the police chiefs, Negrete and Ortiz Revoledo, Inspector Fernandez, and this is crucial, a guy from the Chamber of Commerce. The economy is tied to the crime from the very beginning.
And they're trying to make sense of the horror.
They're trying to find a pattern. They focus on 3 clear-cut cases, victims who have this horrifying specific signature.
What's the signature?
All 3 had their right breasts were cut off and whose left nipples were bitten off. The detail is just chilling. And Ortiz Revoledo immediately jumps to a conclusion.
A serial killer.
He says, we have a serial killer, like in the Gringo movies. He argues it's the only explanation. It gives them a framework, a way to contain the horror. But Negrete's response is the grim truth. He just says, if only it were just 3.
The serial killer is almost a comfort. It's a distraction from the much bigger, more chaotic reality of hundreds of victims.
Exactly. And this violence isn't just external to the law. It's part of the police culture itself. It's deeply misogynistic and corrupt.
We see that at the restaurant where the cops eat breakfast.
At Trejo's, they
Yeah.
tell these just vicious, degrading jokes about women. Jokes like, why don't women know how to ski? Because it never snows in the kitchen. It's not just dark humor. This is the psychological foundation that allows the violence against women to happen and go unpunished. The very people supposed to protect them are fostering this atmosphere of contempt.
And the violence exists inside the police force, too. There's a brutal hierarchy.
We see it with Epifanio Galindo, an associate of the police chief. When a cop beats up a character named Lalo Cura, Galindo is brought in to deliver justice. And it's not legal justice.
What does he do?
He grabs the cop, pulls out a switchblade, and just slices his face open from mouth to ear. It's a ritualized, theatrical act of violence to enforce a personal, brutal kind of power that has nothing to do with the law.
It's a message. The rules of the street are more important than the rules of the state.
And running parallel to all this, there's another mystery. The demon penitent.
They're church attackers.
Yes, someone is breaking into churches, Santa Rafael, Santa Deo, Santa Catalina, and just desecrating them, smashing statues, urinating and defecating on the altar. An inspector named Juan de Dios Martinez is on that case.
And he's a more competent cop, right? What's his theory?
Martinez figures the penitent must have a car to get between the churches. But his main insight is psychological. He thinks the attacker has sacrophobia, a fear and hatred of sacred objects.
So the violence is spiritual in origin.
He thinks so. He believes the original goal wasn't to kill anyone, but just to vent his rage on the images of the saints. So the killings that happened were accidental, a transference of that rage from the statues to the people.
Yeah.
It's another kind of structured pathological violence.
This reality also just, it swallows up the American reporter, Oscar Fate. He's there to cover a boxing match and stumbles into this nightmare.
And when he tries to report on it, to bring this reality to an American audience, he's met with this just staggering indifference and cruelty.
His editor rejects the story.
Brutally. He asks this appalling racist question. How many niggers have ropes around their neck? Basically saying the story isn't sensational enough for an American audience. It doesn't fit their prepackaged narrative of violence.
And he adds this layer of snobbish insult to it.
He accuses Fate of wanting to coucher avec moi, French for sleep with me.
Yeah.
He uses this mix of languages to put fate down, to position himself as this cultured gatekeeper who couldn't care less about the real suffering in a Mexican city.
And Fate's investigation leads him to a private investigator, Loya, who's looking for a missing woman named Kelly. And Loya uncovers a link to big business.
A terrifying link. Loya finds that Kelly, who ran a modeling agency, was making frequent trips to Santa Teresa for party planning. And her trips were always connected to powerful businessmen, including one who owned the maquiladoras and, chillingly, the Santa Teresa slaughterhouse. The implication is clear.
That high-level business is connected to the disappearance of these women.
And when the PI, Loya, is asked if Kelly is alive or dead, he says one of the most haunting things in the entire book.
What does he say?
He says that in Mexico, a person can be more or less dead.
Wow. More or less dead. What does that even mean?
It's the perfect description for a victim in a lawless state.
Yeah.
It means you've disappeared. You have no legal status, no physical presence, but you're not confirmed yet either. You're in this limbo of suffering. It's a state of horror beyond finality, where you've been erased from existence, but your body might still be out there suffering.
Yeah. That chaos, that reality, it forces a character like Amalfitano, the Chilean professor, to just retreat into his own head.
He can't cope.
Yeah.
He calls Santa Teresa a disgusting city, and he describes the university where he works as a cemetery that suddenly begins to think in vain.
He sees intellectualism as useless there.
Totally useless. And you see his desperation in this very strange, symbolic act he performs. He takes a geometry book.
A subject he knows nothing about.
Right. Rafael Dieste's Testamento Geometrico.
Yeah.
And he hangs it from a clothesline in his backyard, just letting the wind swing it back and forth.
Why geometry?
Because geometry is pure order. It's timeless structure, mathematical certainty. He's literally hanging order out in the middle of chaos, subjecting the purity of math to the dirty wind of this disgusting city. It's this beautiful, futile gesture.
And this retreat leads him to a major philosophical point in the book, a critique of modern literary taste.
This is one of the core ideas. He thinks about a bookish young pharmacist he once knew who represents the modern reader. This reader prefers minor, perfect works, like Kafka's Metamorphosis or Melville's Bartleby or Capote's Breakfast at Tiffany's. They're perfect, contained, polished gems.
And he contrasts those with what he calls the imperfect torrential works. Why do we prefer the perfect ones?
Because they're safe. They don't expose you to risk. You can admire the master's skill from a distance. But the torrential works, the big, messy, sprawling masterpieces that 2666 itself is an example of, those are the ones that blaze paths into the unknown.
And that unknown is what terrifies us.
Yes. He says the modern reader has no interest in real combat when the great masters struggle against that something that terrifies us all. And that something is the abyss. Its structural evil, meaninglessness, the reality of a place like Santa Teresa. We'd rather have a small, perfect, contained tragedy than risk confronting a truth so big and horrible it might just break us.
And this ties directly back to Archimboldi, doesn't it? To the idea of the writer as someone who conceals things.
Exactly. Why did Hans Reiter have to become Archimboldi?
Oh.
Because, from this philosophical view, writing isn't an act of revelation. It's an exercise of concealment. The writer has to create a lot of books, a lot of lovely pines, to act as a distraction.
A smokescreen.
A smokescreen to shield the one thing that really matters. The wretched cave of our misfortune. The entire creative output is a defense mechanism to hide the central trauma that made the writer in the first place.
There's also that line about coincidence. In a place like Santa Teresa, it seems like a luxury you can't afford.
It's an incredible idea, recounted Tamarini. Suffering is accumulated, that's a fact, and the greater the suffering, the smaller the coincidence. It means that once you're deep enough in structural suffering like the characters in the city are, luck just. It ceases to be a factor. Everything feels fated, deterministic, connected by a web of pain.
Okay, shifting gears completely here. We also get this character, Barry Seaman, the former Black Panther. His ideas about wealth are bracing.
A real dose of cold pragmatism. His book is called Eating Ribs with Barry Seaman, and it's part cookbook, part manifesto. He's furious with how poor people who get rich spend their money. He hates the limousines, the flashy spending.
He wants dignity and community investment.
And his plan for it is ruthless.
Yeah.
He says if you get rich, you should only ever publicly admit to making half of what you really earn.
And the other half?
You use it to set up secret funds that finance community businesses. Laundries, bars, video stores. And all the profits from those go back into the community as scholarships.
But there's a chilling footnote to that idea.
A devastating one. He says basically, never mind if the scholarship students end up killing themselves because they listen to too much rap, or killing their white teacher and 5 classmates in a rage.
So the individual cost doesn't matter?
Not at all.
Yeah.
It's about building long-term, structural, collective power, no matter the immediate individual human cost. It's a brutal logic that, in its own way, mirrors the cold determinism of Santa Teresa.
And we end the section back with Inspector Martinez trying to deal with the penitent case. He has this conversation about phobias that feels like a final attempt to structure all this fear.
The director at the asylum gives him this whole list of fears.
Hmm.
Optophobia, fear of opening your eyes. Pedophobia, fear of children. But it comes down to a choice between two massive, all-encompassing fears.
Pantophobia versus phobophobia.
The fear of everything versus the fear of fear itself. It's the ultimate battle between chaos and system.
And Martinez, the cop, trying to impose order, chooses phobophobia, the fear of fear. Why?
Because if you have pantophobia, the fear of everything, you're paralyzed. You can't function. But phobophobia, the fear of fear, is a system. It's a snake eating its own tail. And if it's a system, you can analyze it. You can manage it. You can't eliminate the fear, but you can contain its structure.
It's the only way to cope in that city. You have to try and impose a structure, whether it's a police investigation or geometry on a clothesline or a novel onto a reality that is just pure, terrifying chaos.
It's the only way.
This has been a pretty relentless deep dive. We've followed this absurd academic quest for a ghost, and we watched it just shatter against the reality of Santa Teresa. We've seen the author himself, Hans Reiter, build an entire identity out of the wreckage of war and nihilism.
I think what really stands out is that collision between high art and low horror.
Mm-hmm.
The critics were looking for this perfect, contained masterpiece, and they were totally blind to the real masterpiece of horror, the murder epidemic that was happening all around them. It proves Amalfitano's point, doesn't it? The preference for the small, perfect work over the big, messy, torrential truth is what allows the real horror to go unseen.
Right. The core knowledge here seems to be that every system we looked at, academia, journalism, philosophy, is ultimately a kind of denial, a kind of concealment. The novel's own sprawling structure is like that philosopher's idea. You need many lovely pines to shield the wretched cave of our misfortune. We get lost in the academic chase, the police procedural, the author's weird books.
But the central horror, the cave, remains uncontained. And it all comes back to the origin of the book itself, a dying man trying to engineer a future for his kids. That accumulated suffering we talked about, the war, the murders, it all proves that when suffering reaches a certain point, coincidence just disappears. Everything in this story feels tragically, horribly necessary.
So we've talked about this critique, that we prefer minor works over the great torrential ones that risk failure to explore the terrible unknown. We saw the writer Archimboldi literally escaping his past in order to write. So if every novel is an act of concealment meant to hide that wretched cave of our misfortune, what specific truth does the overwhelming, chaotic scope of this entire deep dive conceal about our modern world? And what piece of difficult, unmanageable knowledge are you avoiding in favor of smaller, more comfortable certainties?